everybody, it's Caleb back again with more Red Knot. This time I have the sequel to Heresy, Inquisition by Anselm Audley. The cover's okay. It's got like a castle on a hill and the ocean is behind the guy's name and the heading on here, which is internationally best-selling author of Heresy. And the sky is like maybe sunset, but there could be like fires going on and smoke billowing into the sky. You know, you're not really sure if that's a sunset or something's on fire, but I think that's supposed to be a sunset. So the back, nothing except for praise. So let me get the announcer voice. Praise for Heresy, Book 1 of the Aquasilva trilogy. Audley's first novel launches an epic trilogy set in a world where magic and religion vie for precedence. The author's skill at portraying young people caught up in world-shaking events should appeal to YA readers as well as general fantasy fans. Library Journal. In case you missed it, it was okay. Not my kind of thing because we're too focused on describing everything, mostly the backgrounds and settings, than any actual character building. And that was really my problem with it, aside from some grammar issues. So I expect more of the same from this book, but maybe better. Audley makes an exciting debut, full of action and intrigue. Book list. The size and scope of this novel demonstrate... Wait, shouldn't that be demonstrates? Anyway, the size and scope of this novel demonstrate Audley's energy and ambition. Publishers Weekly. So let's actually read what this book is about. On the vast water world of Aquasilva, the priestly domain controls magic, weather, and history itself. Determined to crush every last spark of resistance against their despotic rule, they have launched a brutal inquisition in order to root out dissent and heresy wherever they find them. Or they think they find them, I guess. With their army of fanatical holy warriors, the Sacrai, the hooded inquisitors advance across the globe, setting both books and human beings to the torch. Young Cathan, heir to the throne of Lipador, has already escaped the Inquisition once. Now, as he and his companions embark on a hazardous voyage in search of potential allies, he finds himself keeping barely one step ahead of his vengeful foes. But the domain is not the only power-seeking Cathan. In decadent Theta, a hidden conspiracy of dissonance plots to use him to further his own seditious purposes, while in his capital city of Celerion, Al-Astray, the Emperor spins his webs of intrigue in the Imperial Palace. A sweeping epic that bears comparisons to both Tolkien and Frank Herbert. Inquisition confirms the promise shown by Anselm Audley's outstanding debut, Heresy, and establishes him as an excellent new voice in fantasy and science fiction. My opinion, based on the first book thus far, not bad, but you could read it if you want. Now, I did not read Heresy past chapter 3, and I wasn't turned off to it, I wouldn't, my response to that book wasn't absolutely no, I will not read any more of this book, but my interest wasn't really grabbed. It's just kind of, I kind of want to know what happens, but I'm not really interested in reading the book. It's that kind of thing. Somebody tell me what happens, give me a Wikipedia summary, and I'm good. So I'm going to actually read a thing before I read a thing, because it's supposed to catch you up in case you don't remember the first book, I guess. But here we go. As things stand, the domain has been defeated in Lipador, with the two survivors, Median and Shahardin, sent back to Equotia in disgrace. So apparently Shahardin was a bad guy. Pity. I liked him. Though really he is just spouting a lot of exposition about how stuff with religion and heroes' epic tales work anyway. So he really didn't have his own personality. He's just like, yeah, I'm just kind of chill with everything, and I need to convert people, but I don't need to be all up in their business. But apparently that was a facade. Catherine stands in for his convalescing father, which I don't know what that word means, as Count of Lipitor, enjoying with his friends an Indian summer at the end of the year. Hamilcar, however you say that, returns to Tanith, later to be joined by Elsel. He has his feud against Foriath to pursue, and a new opportunity of alliance with House Canadrath, who were brought into the picture by Catherine's call for help after Elnabal's poisoning. The archipelago is still suffering under the Domain's yoke, and it is there that Catherine, with the impatient Palatine and Ravina, whose identity as the Pharaoh only the three of them know, turns his attention. He also has the ancient flagship Aeon defined. Sagantha and his crew have gone on their way to more devious plots, and in Celerian, Alistair, I think that's supposed to be Alistair, and I've been pronouncing it horribly wrong. The Emperor spins his webs of intrigue in the Imperial Palace. So this really tells me nothing except that the Domain's a bunch of assholes, which we knew from the first book, and Shahardin is evil. And that's about it. Oh, fuck you! It's got a fucking prologue. Fuck! Is everything closed down? Every last system, Admiral. I'm just about to take the reactor offline. Deep, pulsing blue light illuminated the four people standing there, casting uneven shadows onto... I'm not sure if that should be one word or if that's okay like that, but anyway, onto the walls. Almost like wraiths standing behind them, Admiral Sedalis thought with a shudder. Check that we have enough power in the reserves. Centurion Minos nodded and walked forward to the huge glowing spear that sat in the middle of the bridge, his face cast into sharp relief by the light. Beyond the little pool of radiance, the rest of the huge room was in gray darkness, its interfaces and displays still and dead. There was utter silence for a moment as Sedalis looked for one last time around the bridge of his flagship. It was many centuries older than him, and, with any luck, would outlive him by as long. But he would never see it again. He tried to imprint every last detail on his mind. Minos sliding his hands into the interface, Irista fumbling to light the torch, a look of fatigue and resignation on her face, and Hercutus, the master-at-arms, standing to Irista's left, and holding her precious instrument case, his eyes fixed on the spear. All of them knew that they were saying goodbye, to each other as well as to the ship. The Emperor had put an astronomical price on their heads, making it too dangerous even to flee together. There was a whole world out there, a diminished one perhaps, but with plenty of places to make a new life, for some. More than enough, Minos reported. Shall I shut it down now? Sedalis shook his head. Your task here is done. I will finish it. I will take the ship to her final resting place. You're staying, aren't you? Irista said, as white flames leaped from the end of the torch, driving the shadows wild. Where else is there for me? Sedalis said, smiling at her. The young scientist was a catch for someone, and 30 years ago he might have considered trying to be that someone. It would be a hard life for one in her profession now, and with the programs and the fanatics denouncing everything that looked remotely unnatural. But she was more than clever enough to find a place somewhere, perhaps as an oceanographer. Not even the priests could do without them. She didn't protest, which surprised him, nor did Centurion Minos, whose idealism still seemed to be intact despite everything that had happened. Hecactus, sure, I'll go with that. Hecactus stepped forward, slinging the instrument case casually over one muscled shoulder. He was still wearing the remnants of a naval uniform, with the badge of his rank set proudly on the fraying collar. Goodbye, sir. It's been an honor to know you. There was no one Sedalis would rather have heard it from, not even from his wife, butchered by the enemy in the fall of Solarian. Alistair. Hecactus had been ship's boy in Sedalis' first command nearly a quarter of a century ago, and since then had kept every crew together for him. He'd even turned down the post of deputy quartermaster general for this last assignment just a few short months ago. Thank you, Hecactus. Oh my god, the names! I'm going to kill the person who thought the names were delicious? Who thought these were great, fantastic names? Thank you, Hecactus. Good luck in New Hyperion. They intercepted the message a few weeks ago before the Sky Eyes went offline. You mean satellites? My cat's freaking out in the background. A broadcast from an ex-Imperial flagship urging all surviving naval ships to join a colonizing expedition to the ravaged continent of New Hyperion, free from the tyranny of the Emperor. I don't know what the cat is doing. Hecactus, never having known another life than the Navy, had decided to give it a try. Minos and Arista, whom he hardly knew, bid their farewells and then followed Hecactus out of the bridge, taking the torch with them. Standing alone on the bridge, Sedalis waited until the echoes of their footsteps had died away before he sat down in his admiral's chair again to guide the ship her final few miles. Then, when she finally came to a halt, he gathered up the carrying bag lying on the floor, lit a torch of his own, and set off in another direction. In the other direction, my bad. As if on cue, the deep blue light pulsed one last time, then died, leaving the spear a black ball in its gimbals. What? I don't know what that is. It was so dark that nothing was even reflected from its surface. It was a quarter of an hour's walk through the hollow, empty central passageway of the ship to the place where he was going. The huge double doors opened soundlessly in front of him, and he walked up the central aisle, seeming like a tiny speck of torchlight in the immensity of the hall. The walls were transparent and looked out into the ocean, but down here in the abyss there was nothing to see except blackness. Even before he reached the steps, Sedalis saw the figure on the throne at the aisle's end, a shadowy presence in the gloom. When he came to the foot of the stairway, he stopped, unslung the bag, and propped the torch up in the flagstaff socket on the floor. Then, slowly and unhurriedly, Sedalis changed into his dress uniform, correct in every last detail down to the rank stars and the fastening of the belt, as he had worn it for 35 years. Finally, he strapped on his ceremonial sword, the silver casing on its hilt glittering coldly. Punctilious to the last, Sedalis took the bag with his other clothes and stowed it away in a cabinet behind and to one side of the throne, then went back to the center of the hall and walked up the steps to kneel solemnly before the corpse who occupied the throne. Tiberius Galderin Tarconator, Emperor of Theta, stared unseeingly back at him, the deep gray eyes above his finely chiseled cheekbones untouched by the decay, looking exactly as he had when he'd been alive. There was a faint, sad smile on his lips, and the robe he wore, the same royal blue as Sedalis' uniform, covered the fatal wound in his chest. There was a sealed wax tablet at his feet, a last message that Sedalis had already written to the next true heir to set foot on the ship. There was only one thing wrong, but not even Sedalis had been able to remedy that. The crown that rested on the dead emperor's raven-black hair was the hierarch's diadem, not the crown of stars. That was on the head of the usurper, the traitor. An immense sadness swept through Sedalis as he drew his sword, a sword that had never tasted blood, and reversed it. For a moment he almost hesitated, but then he looked up at Tiberius again, seeing the father instead of the son. Oh, Aetius, why did you have to leave us? Why couldn't one of us have gone in your place? There was no answer, as he'd known there would be. He had made his farewells. Then Cleomenes Sedalis, first admiral of the Thetan Empire, drove his sword unerringly into his own heart. As the mist clouded his mind, he thought he heard the Emperor's voice calling. And this would have been really sad and touching, but as usual it means absolutely nothing to me. Because damn prologues to hell. Chapter 1. It's winter! The guild's confirmed it! What do you mean confirmed it? You don't have a set day for winter? Again, this is the same society that has torpedoes and pulse cannons, and apparently satellites, but they still use chariots to get around. They have underwater ships. They use elephants to attack shit. I don't know. I sat up squinting in the glare of the afternoon sun to see where the voice was coming from. After a moment I heard footsteps on the path below, and then a head appeared behind the rocks. For sure this time, somebody sitting on my right asked, when aren't they sure? The original speaker clambered up the last few feet and came around to sit down on the threadbare path of grass. The priests were 2 weeks out last year. Her questioner shifted position and inspected her lute critically, brushing a stray sea pod off the fingerboard. That was the priests. They haven't got a clue. They certainly ought to have. They're the only ones who can forecast it properly. I looked up into the cloudless blue sky, as if somewhere up there I could see the same signs as the priests to tell us that the temperature was about to plummet and the storms redouble their efforts. The guild would be far better at predicting winter if only the priests gave it a chance. Let's not get into that argument again, Catherine, the newcomer said, leaning back against the trunk of the lone cedar tree set apart from the forest near the cliff's edge. We've got a few more days of it being warm enough to sit outside, and there's no need to waste it. We'll have all the time in the world to argue when winter does come. When's that going to be? When this unnatural hot spell finishes? She wore only a thin tunic and sandals, despite the fact it was well into autumn. 2 or 3 days at most. Well, we're not going to tell you who anybody except the main character is, so screw y'all. 2 or 3 days. Well, nothing lasted forever, and we certainly hadn't expected this sudden return to summer temperature so late in the year. It would have been even better if I hadn't had to spend so much time working attending the clan business while my father was convalescing. He might have taken his title back, but he still wasn't fit to cope with all the paperwork, so I ended up doing it. It was a job I loathed, but it didn't seem quite so bad as it had been. Perhaps that was because I'd been through a lot worse now. Have you done anything useful? Depends on what useful means, Palatine, said Ravana, who was sitting next to me with her back against the tree trunk. There was a book lying face down next to her, which she hadn't been reading for some time, at least not since before the last time I bothered to look. Useful as in what you said you were going to do. Palatine's grasp of archipelagian grammar was still a little sketchy sometimes, even after 18 months away from the convoluted language of her homeland. Look through this book for something that obviously isn't there, you mean. If it isn't there, why are you bothering? Why not actually go and look for it somewhere, just as soon as you tell us where to start? Palatine rolled her eyes, and absently began twisting a green shoot around her fingers, unable as ever to keep still. She was the only one of us who hadn't welcomed the heat and the chance to do very little. Sighing before picking the book up once more, the other woman started reading again. I had a copy too, but not the faintest idea where I'd put it. I couldn't remember having brought it out here. No, it was at the bottom of the chest in my room, where nobody would accidentally come across it and investigate its content. Well, what's the book? Am I supposed to know this from the last book? What if I didn't read the last book? You're supposed to fill this crap in, author. I moved back a little, trying to find a more comfortable position for my head on the broad tree root. It really was too hot to do anything except lie around in the shade. Besides, there was no need to do anything. I'd done all the paperwork for today. The rest of the clan was feeling just as enervated, and people were reluctant to get down to tiresome ledgers or petitions. I banished from my mind the thought that there would be a sudden excess of such work with the onset of winter. I closed my eyes again and slipped back into a contented doze, unable to ignore the inconvenient projection on the root that was digging into my back, and even the highly irritating cooing from some doves in the woods behind us. Doves were fine in small doses, but the noise they made got on my nerves very quickly. Well, you're kind of an asshole. Doves are cool. The muffled sound of their surf on the beach below was much better, and served as an excellent accompaniment when the lutenist started playing an air a few minutes later. Started playing an air? Shouldn't that be music or a song or something? Whatever. Palatine, how on earth did the Thetans win this war? Asked the reader suddenly. What do you mean? They were drunk all the time. Look, the man who wrote this was their high priest, but in 1 week he goes to more parties than a regiment of socialites. We enjoy life, Palatine said. When we have time free, we don't lie around under the trees staring dreamily out to sea. If it's so good, why don't you want to go back? I could almost feel the glare Palatine gave her, but didn't bother to open my eyes. Palatine had been irritable for at least a week, if not longer, and I was used to it by now. Stop arguing, the lutenist said, without interrupting the flow of her melody. You're disturbing my concentration. My apologies, Giselle, Palatine said, not sounding as though she meant it. There was no answer, and my mind drifted off again, far away from the sun-dappled shores of Lipitor. I knew the reasons for Palatine's short temper, all of us did, but it was what I was doing, or rather not doing, that was to blame. While she fretted, anxious for us to leave, I was content to wait, and do nothing. Not that I didn't have some support, because none of the others seemed in any hurry. I hadn't told anybody why we were still here, why we were lingering so long when staying here for good obviously wasn't an option. I had pleaded clan duties, and for more than a month, as my father slowly recovered from the effects of his poisoning. It had been enough, but all of them knew that wasn't the real reason, that no dull paperwork, however necessary to the clan, required my personal presence. My mother and the first advisor were just as capable and infinitely more patient. I suppose it's too much to ask if we'll be moving once winter's here, Palatine said, jabbing her finger into my side. I looked at her indignantly, the bright sunlight momentarily dazzling me. I'm not going to leave just because the weather changes. Then when will it be? When the stars fall and the oceans rise to cover us all? When a priest opens his mouth without mentioning heresy? Or when everyone else has died of old age? We've already told you I'm not setting out until I have an idea where I'm going. So how does staying in Lipitor help you? There's nothing here that could possibly aid you except that wretched book. And where else can we go? You might consider a library. They have lots and lots of books in them, even old scrolls with cobwebs on that, They have lots and lots of books in them, even old scrolls with cobwebs on. There should be a them there on them, that I'm sure might tell you what you're looking for. So the people who have gone to ridiculous lengths to hide the thing are then going to leave messages everywhere saying, "We are here, Palatine. I know you hate doing nothing, but we can't just rush into this. And what happens if the Inquisition finds out? If they get hold of us, That'll be the end of disagreement with them. Don't I deserve to be told just what you're waiting for? Don't we all?" She looked to the other two for support, and so did I. Estelle was concentrating on her lute playing, seemingly absorbed in the music. Beside me, Ravana put the book down again and fixed her serious gray eyes on gaze first on me, then Palatine. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you? Someone in particular," she said. I bit back an annoyed retort and nodded. Perhaps I hadn't been as clever as I thought. Palatine buried her face in her hands, exaggerating as always. "We could be here forever. Why didn't I see this earlier? I could have gone off on one of the other ships when they left. Captain Tanis takes months to turn up, and never where you want him. He said he'd be back when Lipitor was secure, but meanwhile he'll have been dealing with some clan rebellion or troublesome priest or somebody's agent, and he'll be stuck in a backwater for weeks at a time. In backwater what? A backwater town? Is there a place called Backwater? What are you trying to say here? Would you set out on a sea journey knowing you hadn't consulted an oceanographer? Tanis may not turn up when we want, but he was there when it disappeared. If anyone knows where it is, it'll be him." "I wish you luck." Palatine stood up and headed off along the shoreline, disappearing after a moment behind the trunk of another cedar. "She's only going to get worse," Ravana said, staring after her. And she does know Tanis better than you." "What? That doesn't change anything. We still have to wait for him." I know. But what if he doesn't come? Do you want to stay here all through the winter while the Inquisition schemes and plots? We may have won a victory here, but they're very bad losers. And by staying here, we're certain to draw their attention again. It's best to keep moving." Something rustled in the branches of a cedar tree above us, perhaps one of those wretched doves. Estelle's lute went on, accompanied by a chorus of cicadas. "If they move against us, they're admitting that what happened wasn't just the work of a few renegades, and people will begin to wonder what they're up to. It's old news by now, Catherine, and a fundamentalist never forgets a setback. Nor does anyone else, it seems. If that includes our allies, then why not more so?" She took my hand and reached for the book again, but at that moment there was a sharp crack. A second bundle of cedar fronds fell on both of us, accompanied by a shower of cones. "Jaren!" I shook my head, trying to clear bits of tree out of my hair, as Ravana brushed twigs off herself. I looked up to see my brother's grinning face looking down at us. "I thought so," he said triumphantly. He was well out of reach, 3 or 4 branches above us, but before he could say anything else, there was a strangled cry over to my right. Cur, you little... It'll take forever to get all that dust out of my lute." Pausing only to make sure her precious instrument was safe, Ilse jumped to her feet and ran around to the other side of the tree, and in short order my brother's triumphant grin gave way to a wail of outrage as Estelle clambered up toward him as easily as if she was walking along the beach. I'd never been sure where Estelle had learned to pick locks or scale walls and trees like ordinary mortals climb steps, but her skills had proved useful more than once. "As far as Jaren's concerned, grown-ups can't climb trees," I whispered to Ravana. "With any luck, he won't try this one again." "I hope not," she said, dusting herself down. "You look a fright." "Look who's talking. I think the primitive look suits you, especially that twig in your hair. You're a dick." Ravana's hands flew up to her mass of curly black hair before she saw my grin and realized there was no such twig. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you really were related to Jaren." "Wait, so you're not? So you're adopted or some shit?" "Whatever." There was a sadness in her eyes suddenly, and I remembered her mention of a younger brother who'd been killed by the Inquisition's companion organization, the murderous holy warders, who called themselves Sacri, the Sacred Ones. Whether or not they were sacred, they were certainly devout in their zealot dedication to the religion of shedding blood. A steady stream of protests and apologies was now coming from somewhere in the branches of the cedar tree, a noise which intensified as Iselle reappeared from behind the trunk, her hand clamped around my brother's wrist. What do you want done with him? She asked me, trying to stifle a smile. Iselle seemed to be whatever, incapable of anything more than momentary anger, except where Helltites were concerned. She hated their entire people with a passion which I thought might have some bearing on her escape artist abilities, but she never said anything about it, and none of us wanted to ask. We could always give him a dunking, I suggested, gesturing down at the beach a few feet below us. I've got a better idea, Ravana said, and went over to whisper in Iselle's ear. There was a howl of protest from the eavesdropping Jaren. I've got news, he said, shouting to make sure he got everybody's attention. I won't tell you unless you let me go. Fine then, we will, Iselle said, bending down and gathering a handful of bark and twig ends. Having scattered them over Jaren's hair, she let go of his arm. Now, what's the news? Jaren shot her a black look and drew himself up, shaking his head. Isn't he like 5, maybe 6 years old by now? I don't know how long the first book took. How is a 5-year-old able to, tell you all this stuff? But anyway, Jaren shot her a black look and drew himself up, shaking his head. Some important people have arrived from an important place with an important message. Well, that sounds more like a 5-year-old. The sea's still just down there, Iselle said, but Jaren had got her measure by now. A huge manta, Jaren announced, from Farasa, with that big blonde Kanadrath man on board. He said there's news from Tanith, and he didn't look very happy. Oh, and the courtiers is with him. The Halatites, Iselle said instantly, and slipped her loot into its leather traveling case. Ravana and I looked at one another, and she nodded slightly. Both of us had the same thought. Now you'll be gloomy all the way back, Jaren said, with a 7-year-old... Okay, so he's 7 now, instead of 5. Jaren said, with a 7-year-old's intolerance for problems that didn't concern him. No, we won't, I said, forcing a smile. Jaren chatted cheerfully as we made our way down the path and to the beach, the quickest way back to Lipitor. There was a proper track through the forest to the logging road, but it meandered to avoid obstacles and wound around the side of a small hill, and none of us wanted to waste any time. I assumed Palatine had gone back to the city, because there was no sign. Thank you for your interruption. I assumed Palatine had gone back into the city because there was no sign of her sitting on the edge of a 10-foot rock cliff, in fact a seawall, that separated the forest from the beach. The city soon came into sight across the broad curving sweep of the bay from where we were. Some of the stone buildings within the walls still had scaffolding around them, and many roof gardens were missing. This was the legacy of the storm we'd unleashed more than a month ago, ironically enough to try to protect the city. But most of the damage had been repaired, the walls had been bolstered, the construction of a new gatehouse between the palace quarter and the harbor quarter. Wait, harbor quarter? I don't remember if there was a harbor quarter. I've already took the book back to the library, so I don't remember, and it's not like I can check. Was well underway. As we approached the city though, my thoughts kept straying back to Jaren's news, especially the bit about the presence of Ultan Kanadrath. We only knew him and his house slightly, since a month ago when they had led the relief force. And although we'd rewarded them for their help, they were still more or less an unknown quantity. So why have the son of Lord Kanadrath come all the way out out here to deliver bad news. We entered the city through the small postern gate in the palace quarter, accessible only along the wooden walkway that ran under the walls. It was forever being damaged by the waves and storms, but no one had ever proposed replacing it with a stone path that would give enemies a clear route into the city. The Marines guarding the postern looked at us curiously as we approached. "Been taking a dust bath, Viscount?" one of them said to me, his eyes straying to Ravana's hair. "My brother's taking up tree surgery," I said, before he could say anything suggestive. "Because that's what I do with my lady friends that happen to be my lady friends and not like my sex friends." What an asshole. That guard should be fired. Unfortunately, he didn't take the trouble to check which tree he was operating on. "You can come and prune my olive tree then. Huge thing it is. Keep you occupied for a week or so," the other guard said to Jaren, his bearded face split by a broad grin. "Good day to you." The postern led into a narrow street only a short walk from the palace. The doors of the houses were all open because of the heat, and two old men playing cards in the shadows of the narrow colonnade greeted us as we went past. It was cooler here in the city, shielded from the sun by 3- and 4-story buildings, and washing hung across the street on lines of poles. Yes, because it's going to be cooler in a city than it is out near a sea. That's not how it works, dude. That is not how it works. That's why the outskirts of Maryville and Alcoa get snow, but Maryville and Alcoa usually get jack. Then again, Maryville always stayed open while everybody else was closed. Maryville would stay open even if a nuclear bomb hit and this place flooded, only leaving one shack of a building that could fall at any second, and they just issue everybody scuba gear and like anti-radiation pills or something, and then everybody would have to go taking turns, I guess, but you would have class in that single room shack that's about to fall down and crush everybody. That's how bad Maryville is. Anyway, I got off on a tangent. There was a gentle splashing sound everywhere, too, made by the little fountains that stood in alcoves and at street corners. Once these fountains had been the city's main source of water, but since the concept quickly followed by reality of piped water inside houses had reached Lipitor about 50 years ago, their main purpose now was to keep the air fresh in summer. 2 more Marines on duty at the gate of the palace waved us through and into the small white shed courtyard beyond. Even with the tighter security since the invasion, they didn't need to check my identity. Like the houses, the palace gate was covered in scaffolding, and the doors weren't yet finished. Wooden barricades were erected and taken down noisily at dusk and dawn. "There you are," came Palatine's voice. I looked up to see her standing on the balcony at the top of the flight of steps running up the right-hand wall. "What on earth have you been up to, Ravana? Were you trying to dye your hair?" "It was Jaren," I said, as my brother rushed up the stairs ahead of us. "My father and his guests were in the reception room," Palatine told us, because she couldn't actually tell us, so I'm just going to tell you. Looking more animated than she had in days, despite the worried frown on her face. Ravana and I brushed the dust out of our hair as best as we could, using a polished bronze plate as a mirror. "Come on, it'll have to do," Palatine said eventually. If they appear without warning, they can't expect you to look immaculate." I wouldn't have worried if it had just been courtiers, my father's oldest friend, but I'd only met Canadrath once before. I hadn't made a good impression then, either, hollow-eyed and bruised as I'd been, wearing a long robe to hide the livid marks on my arms and legs. This would be a definite improvement. There was a servant waiting by the door to the reception room, and he announced us without formality. "Ah, there you are," my father said, turning from his conversation with the other two men. "It's Count Cathin," the second man said, making the customary stiff bow to one of equal station. "I'm glad to see you in good health." I bowed back, absurdly conscious that all three of them were quite a bit taller than me. Old Canadrath, who greeted me, had a fair colouring and blonde hair rare on any continent, let alone equatorial Tanith. My second meeting with him only confirmed my impression of a man who was in the wrong business. With his straight beard and moustache, not to mention his impressive build, he should have been one of those northern pirates who'd roamed the archipelago in the old days, making their home in the now vanished primeval forest of Thur? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Thure. "He's right, Cathin," said Courtiers, a friendly smile on his face. You looked restful last time we met." The greetings over, Palatine handed out drinks, and Oltan told me and Ravana the news. "The Helatites have taken Ukha and seized the Delta," he said. He said bluntly, "We have now lost all the mainland territories, and 30,000 Helatite troops are camped under our noses. This being Tanith, the merchant lords are all rushing around trying to find things the Helatites want to buy." Courtier said, "Acrebelly? I don't know what that word is. He might have looked like a bear, but he had a keen mind and was usually a lot more tactful than my father." Olten didn't take umbrage at this insult. "I fear the Count is right. Lord Braca and I have been pressing for military action, but the other houses are reluctant to upset what they see as the new status quo." There was silence for a moment. Anyone with any sense at all knew that what bad news it was. Tanith might be a mercantile city built on islands, but it was still very close to the mainland, and the Helatite army had so far proved invincible. Lipitor's future, and that of most other clans, depended on a free Tanith ruled by the merchant lords. It couldn't stay as a trade center under Helatite military rule, especially not if they followed their normal policy of sacking captured cities. I felt my good mood drain away. "They're not doing anything at all?" Ravana asked. Oltan shook his head. "Nothing whatsoever. Oh, the Council of 10 sent a protest to the King of Kings, but they might as well have saved themselves the ink." "Are the Halatites preparing to attack the city?" "Not yet," Olten said. "They still don't have a fleet. They can make life difficult for us, but nothing more as yet." Then I realized why the heir of Canadrath, one of the largest houses in Tanith, had come all the way out here. Lipitor had the biggest iron deposit in Oceanus, and we'd soon be the biggest weapons manufacturer as well. Oltan wanted to make sure our weapons wouldn't be going to the Halatites. "Does this change anything?" I asked my father, who was wearing a loose green robe that had once been formal but had seen better days. He was concerned that the clan shouldn't see how much damage the poison had done, and was wearing the robe to give the appearance that he wasn't emaciated. Most people knew otherwise, but nobody said anything. Courtiers, renowned healers, had assured us he'd recover the lost weight in time. "It makes our sale of weapons rather questionable," he said. "In view of the fact that weapons sent to Tanith will probably end up where we don't want them, shipping them there may not be such a good idea. Where we don't want them." He wasn't only talking about Halatites. They were the immediate menace, true, but behind them was the priesthood, the domain, with its dreams of crusades and blood. They had tried to seize Lipitor for that very reason, to manufacture the weapons for their crusade. After everything we'd gone through, simply to sell the weapons to their allies was unthinkable, and as it happened, the house Canadrath had made its fortune selling weapons in the archipelago, the very place that the domain wanted to cleanse with the holy fire and inquisitors. You want to sell the weapons somewhere else, then? Ravana asked. We'll have to talk to Hamilcar about this, because he's making his profit carrying our iron and weapons to Tanith. Hamilcar was our official Tenethan partner with whom we'd signed the iron contract, and the man who'd saved all of our lives in the invasion. But if there's a market in the archipelago, selling weapons to kill Sakurai, that was a different matter. I saw Ravana's slight smile. For her, they were the butchers who destroyed her family. Sakurai were not even human beings. I have some more information that you might find useful, Oltan said, concerning the two priests who survived the attempted coup here. Arvach Midian and Shahadin, I think his name was. My ears pricked up. They had been the only two survivors of the domain force that had tried to take over Leapdor, and their fate would be a good indicator of how the domain had reacted. Go on, my father said levelly. They went back to the holy city, where apparently Prime Lachazar saw them in prison. Oh, in person, my bad, in person. That couldn't have been a pleasant experience. Nicknamed Hell's Cook. Really? Did somebody else watch Gregory Horror Show and instead of Hell's Chef, we just changed it to Hell's Cook? Lachazar was apparently given to accusing subordinates of being in league with heretics when they failed, but Outland's next words gave the lie to that. Shahardin's been promoted to full Inquisitor and sent out to the archipelago. The Inquisitor General is already there with orders to crush any thoughts of independence in Kalathar. They never give up, Ravana said sadly. They killed a generation, and that wasn't enough. They took over the country, and that wasn't enough. You know, the people they tortured and burned are the ones who learn Kalahari, or who keep the dynastic histories. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Olten said sympathetically. I took you for a Thetan last time we met, but I should have realized my mistake. Seeing you now, there isn't a Thetan born who could look like you. Cunnindrath was right, I thought, as Ravana smiled wanly, her good mood for a few minutes before destroyed by his news. For years she'd straightened her naturally curly black hair, endured the irritation of changed eyes, I guess magic did that, and spent as much time outdoors as possible to accentuate her coloring, pale for a Kalathari. She'd almost looked like a Thetan, but with brown eyes and a mass of black curls, nobody could mistake her any longer. What about Median? Courtiers asked. He's been given a posting in the archipelago. I'm not sure what. I don't think it's anywhere important, but it does mean he's at the center of things. So why does Lachazar give them another chance? Palatine said. He's got plenty more where they came from. I don't think he has, actually, my father said. Shahardin is exceptionally clever, although he rarely showed it when he was an acolyte here. He must be extremely loyal, too, and Lachazar isn't stupid. Their defeat here wasn't Shahardin's fault. As for Miadan, he comes from a powerful Helite family. He's almost indestructible, a member of the old nobility in the domain. This might have set his career back a bit, but he'll still make Exarch someday. The thought of that arrogant boor one day rising to almost the highest post in the service of Ranthus was sickening. Even if I had to agree with their teachings, I had no time for the domain with men like Median and Lachazar at the top. We know he wanted a crusade, Palatine said, toying with the glass. Since we've disrupted his plans, he's got to hit the archipelago some other way, and the Inquisition is the best answer for him, she added, seeing the look on Ravana's face. I couldn't imagine what she must have gone through, seeing her country systematically ripped apart by the Sakurai who's been running it ever since the Archipelagian Crusade, nearly a quarter of a century ago. Ravana had been born a couple of years afterward, and had never known a free Kalathar. She had inherited the title of pharaoh from her grandfather, burned during the crusade, but it had been nothing more than a hollow, mocking reminder of what they'd lost. I sympathized with her. Being an heir was bad enough anyway, as far as I was concerned, without having had to endure the agony Kalathar had gone through. "We're in a position to help," my father said, fixing his gaze on Oltan. "If we can agree on a route for these weapons that bypasses Tanith and goes straight to the archipelago, we might be able to slip people out on the return run." The Canadarth heir looked doubtful. "Great houses have to be careful not to get involved in smuggling," he began, but courtiers cut him off. "If all the people you want to sell weapons to are mouldering in domain prisons, nobody's going to give you money. If there's an organized resistance outside, you might have a chance." "I suppose so," Oltan said, still looking doubtful. "It could ruin our commercial reputation if we're caught, though. It's illegal to import weapons into Kalathar on pain of excommunication, so we'll have to find a third country to ship it to. I think the first step, though, is to put a proposal to Lord Barca."